evening, good night, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Different time zones, so we have to address you differently. This is the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon Show. We come to you live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Please take your smartphone and go to the Facebook page of Guyanese Critic, and you will see us right now. Please type in TBN Guyana, and when the page comes up, press on it, and you will see this program live. We're also on YouTube. Once again, this is the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon Show. My host is Lenox Gildarie. We alternate in leading off, so this evening I will lead off. Before I introduce my guest, Lenox Gildarie has this method or style in which he talks about things that bothers him. So the things that bother Lenox Gildarie, before we come to our interesting guest, going to keep you in suspense. But just let me titillate your imagination. See these two things I have here? I remember when Attorney at Law Gildarie Kissoon was our guest. Mr. Kissoon walks with a stick. And at that time, I was walking with a stick because I had a knee problem. Well, our guest is walking with this, which means our guest has been injured. Well, we talk more about our injured guest, but nevertheless, our very important guest. But the little things that bother Lenox Gildarie.
Good evening, all, wherever you are. I want to say good night, good morning, and thank you very much, dear, for those unnecessary welcome, Freddie Kissoon. I'm not in a very happy mood tonight. In fact, I'm extremely saddened. We've been doing this show for the last 7 months, 8 months now, Freddie Kissoon. And we have used this platform to implore the people of Guyana to be very careful on the roadway. And over the last couple of days, Tuesday to now, I've seen some accidents, reports of accidents that really tore me apart. There was two sisters, very young, one of them pregnant, on a bike, got into an accident with a truck at Gildarie or somewhere there. And then another couple on a bike in Barchico. I understand that the two are dead, up in quarantine. I think it's about 7 or 8 accidents, and I think about 5 or 6 persons died. And there's so many more reports of accident, car flying off the road. What are we doing on the roadways, folks? We got to be a little more careful. It seems as if we're in a runaway train. The road speeding and people not taking care is as if you buy a license and you're taking that as a lease for you to do whatever it is. Speeding seems to be the order of the day. We got to stop it, take stock. We're not doing what's the right thing because everybody's doing something or the other, and you want to follow suit. Let us do what is the right thing. The road law says something, which is that you have to observe the 5 C's. And if you don't know what those 5 C's are, what it is, one of them is courtesy. And you should do the right thing. And we again implore, and we could ill afford to lose the kind of resources, the human resources of this country. We need you on board to not only enjoy what we're going to be getting, but also it is ripping families apart. It is doing a lot to our labor market. So let me stop right there, get straight back to Freddie Kissoon, because the guest that we have in tonight, well, I have a couple of things to say about him. Freddie Kissoon.
Thanks, Lenox, for your little analyses and viewpoints about the things that bother you. This program has been going on for 8 months, and this evening we will take an unusual step. I will ask the operators in the studio to introduce our guests. If they're hearing us, please introduce our guests.
I have a right, as every other ethnicity in this country, to enter into the court traditionally attired. I have a right, as every other ethnicity in this country, to enter into the court traditionally attired. People don't stop people when they walk in there with a goatee. They don't stop people when they walk in here with their traditional African or Chinese attire. But yet here we have a religious person dressed traditionally, and I'm being stopped. My rights are being violated, my constitutional rights are being violated.
And you see this as discrimination?
the diplomatic community, and he injured his Achilles heel. So he's walking on crutches, and his right foot is in plaster of Paris. But nevertheless, he is mentally fit to take his place among us this evening. I am very sorry that we couldn't get
No,
that.
they managed to play it, but you would not have been able to see it there. So it was played. So you
was
could talk
played.
about it.
Well, I asked them that we would be guided by the screen, but so I wouldn't have known it was being played. But Lenox Shuman is our guest, Deputy Speaker of Parliament, founder leader of the Liberty and Justice Party. Lenox descended on the political scene in Guyana in 2019. He emerged as a person who wanted to organize a political party for the Amerindians. He felt that the Amerindians should have their own political party. He will tell us if he still clings to that conceptualization or he has amalgamated his interests. So in 2019, he founded a party specifically to cater for the Amerindians. The election results of 2020 showed that a preponderance of the votes for his party came from the Amerindians. He will tell us what has been happening with the Liberty and Justice Party since March 2020. But one of the unfortunate things and unfair things that surrounded Lenox Shuman in 2019 was this demand that foreign citizens, Guyanese who have foreign passports, should surrender them. And Lenox Shuman did that. And what was that was a constitutional thing to do. But what I found out, and what is almost impossible to ascertain, is that no one except the International Criminal Organization, Interpol, could ask the United States government for the citizenship of anyone. It's against the law of the United States. So in Guyana, if you are running for parliament and someone says you are a foreign citizen, there is no way the American embassy will give that information to GCOM or to anyone. So there were two persons, while Lenox Shuman did the honorable, professional, and legal thing and give up his Canadian citizenship, there were two persons, not from any other party except APNU AFC, that ran in the elections when they were foreign citizens holding citizenship from other countries. But let's introduce the man of the moment. Lenox, how is the foot doing?
Oh, good, Freddie. A little bit uncomfortable, but not bad.
When we ran the advertisement on the screen, we said Lenox Shuman talks about his politics, past, present, and future. So we're going to keep in that order. The politics of the past. How is the Liberty and Justice Party, and what was this like in 2019, and how far we have come from 2019?
Freddie, let me first say good evening to your viewers and your subscribers. And thank both you and Leonard for this opportunity to be on your show. I know it's been overdue. Circumstances would have prohibited us from engaging in this discussion. And I'm happy that I have the opportunity now at least to be interrogated, hopefully not too harshly, on some of the things that would have happened. I want to step back a little bit and, echo the same sentiments that Leonard echoed earlier in terms of people being cautious on the road. I've seen so many people who were in such a rush just to get one car space, one bike space forward. And we have not really met the ebb of our growth in terms of traffic yet. And I would implore people to just be cautious on the road as we start to grow as an economy. The infrastructure is not developing fast enough to accommodate all of the vehicles on the road. So it is my sincere hope that people pay extra attention to that. We have a lot more vehicles on the road. Yes, we all want to get somewhere, but we don't have to get there now. That's one. The second thing is I want to implore also the truck drivers who think that they're driving a car and not calculate for the extra momentum. The stopping distance changes. The heavier a vehicle, the heavier any object, it takes a lot more force to stop it and a lot more distance. So they can't be driving trucks like it's a race car up and down the roadways, and I would implore on them to just be very cautious. For bikers, whether you're on a bicycle, motorcycle, electric cycle, to please look around you and calculate on the things that people will do. For lack of a better word, things that people will do in a very stupid and uncaring manner. Like sometimes cars would come out and think you're just on a bike, you could swerve. But if you swerve, you're swerving into traffic or you're swerving into the trench. So calculate ahead and think a bit further ahead. And that's what I implore all the road users to do. Freddie, back to your point, the Liberty and Justice Party is very much alive and well. We, as you know, we are part of a joiner agreement with a new and united Guyana and the new movement, and we have represented the seat, in my humble view, very well. We've made some shifts nationally, and those things I think we could talk about a little bit further as we go down, but we're doing fairly well.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Freddie, I think what you were really trying to get is for the people to see that clip. And if you've seen that clip being shown a little earlier, ladies and gentlemen, it showed a man entering a particular area. I think it was the courts, one, and then I'm not sure which particular one they showed there, but it would have been in Parliament as well that you tried that.
I did.
But let me make some statements here. I was working at Kiteshore News when that thing happened, and I think he made the front page the next day. Obviously, almost all the newspapers and everybody would have had video clips. This half-naked man,
Fully,
and I'm just
fully
saying,
attired.
hold on. For the people out there, for the people out there who was looking at it, but people didn't understand. A lot of people didn't know that that was a traditional dress of indigenous people, at least a section of them, because others would have their own kind of dress mode there. But I think that was a starting point for me and for a lot of Guyanese of a different way of thinking, because Lenox Shuman was one of them that emerged as one of the faces. There were many others, and eventually we called them the Guardians during the 2020 elections. So for me, it was very profound at that point in time that Lenox Shuman emerged the way that he did. And he insisted. In fact, my wife called you Cheeks. I don't know why she did that, but you led one. You were one of the leaders, the faces that really propelled people to really stand up during that 2020. I would say the scandal that we had in Guyana, and would forever be etched in our history as a time that we should want to forget, but we can't, because it should be a lesson also to us. But I want to ask you straight, Lenox Shuman, what has been the lessons for you? One, of putting your foot down and saying, look, I want to be a Guyanese, a patriotic Guyanese, I represent my people. And two, as to you're not sure where, nobody knows what the future holds, but were you scared at that point in time?
Well,
It's never been done before.
correct. Well, it's never been done in the courts. And we have to look at what the Constitution of Guyana says. Article 149G of the Constitution gives us the right to the protection, preservation, promulgation of our cultures, indigenous peoples. So for me, a large part of it during the electoral process was, if you were in and out of the courts, you'd see on one side you had predominantly Indo lawyers, on the other side predominantly Afro lawyers. And at some point, the international community, based on our discussion, said, all we're seeing here is a battle between two races. And I thought that it was very important that the international community understood, and all Guyanese understood, that Guyana is not only about Afro or Indo. Guyana is an inclusive, it's a very plural society, multicultural. And indigenous peoples play a very critical part in that. And when I thought of it, I said, I could sit there and holler out the window and yell all I want, but there's a profound way to send that message globally and to send that message nationally, is to ensure that people understand that you have a constitutional right to occupy a space. And that prompted me to go into court. And it's not something that I did new. If you remember through the National Two Shows Conference 2015, 2016, 2017, I was dressed the same way. And I had been doing this even in Canada for the Guyana Independence festivities that were held in Canada. I was an Indigenous person riding in the train with my loincloth and my staff. And in Toronto, it's just another person on a train. But you come here and it creates such a spectacle. Now, there is an issue about cultural appropriation, you know. All of the words and the slangs and everything that were thrown at me when people saw me, oh gosh, look at Lenox, look at the, you know, all of the expressions. And yet that is part of Guyana. In fact, that is the core. Guyana existed in that sense before anyone else came.
Mm-hmm.
So for me to dress traditionally, it's basically it's a no-brainer, right? But hold on, we talk about the spectacle that creates, but every day all of us are dressed like Europeans, and no one comes out and say, "What do you think you are? You're a European?" You know, someone comes out with their dashiki and no one tells them anything, or their sari and their dhoti and no one says anything. Why is it that indigenous people should feel such fear and such, I'd say, suffer such psychological trauma just because people cannot appreciate that they live in a plural society where indigenous peoples play a prominent role and they have a constitutional right to maintaining that culture?
But I think when you did that, when you walked into Parliament and you
It was the courts first.
the courts,
Oh.
you would not believe there was a section of the media, there was a section of the society where the political axe to grind. But I think generally you were well respected for that.
No, it was afterward. But I think what struck me there, Freddie, and as it was unfolding, you had live videos of it, right? Was that the courts didn't know, at least the guardians of the gate, the police and so on, didn't know how to treat Lenox because a lot of them, no, you can't come into the court dressed like that. And I think they had to get some legal. Could you get us what happened?
Well, when I showed up, I told the guards, they looked at me and said, well, you're not going in the court like that. I said, why not? It's my constitutional right. The police, the officers of the court were there, and I said, all right, well, basically you're denying me access to a case that I'm actively engaged in, right, which was the whole back and forth with elections. And at one point I asked someone for a pen to record the officer's badge number, and he took off the badge number, took off his badge and held it in his hand. I said, I'd like to see your number, sir, so that I could file a formal complaint. And he took his badge off, and then he would stand in my way. I said, well, if you're not wearing a badge, basically you're not an officer of the court, nor are you an officer of the law, because those people are identified by their badges. So I started to proceed up the court. I got to the court just before I got to the courtroom, and the chief inspector, I think it was a superintendent actually, who said, well, you can't go in the court like that. I said, why not? It's my constitutional right to have access to the justice system. And I think at some point word got to Justice George, and she said, no, bring him in. And that's how I got into the court.
Well, let's talk politics now. 2020 is behind us. You were a parliamentarian. You were the Deputy Speaker of Parliament. From 2020 onwards, did you enjoy that new life? Did you think you made a contribution and you're happy with your entrance to politics and you think that it's a sustainable process?
Freddie, that's a very loaded question. Am I happy with my entrance to politics? It was a very rocky road, as you know, and as Leonard knows. I came in here as an outsider, even though I'm from Guyana. I'm an indigenous Guyanese. Yeah,
not your entrance to politics.
Yeah, no,
if you're happy from 2020.
But you asked the question, the entrance into politics and where we got, right? I came in on very, very rocky terms, as you know. When we launched the Constitution demanded. And even after I submitted that document to the Guyanese Elections Commission, people are still up in arms, like, in disbelief and a whole host of things. Look, I made a commitment to the people that I'm going to live by the Constitution, and I did that. It was a hard decision to make, a really tough decision, because my family, all my brothers and sisters and all of that are still in Canada.
And your wife and children?
My wife and kids also. Now, from 2020 on to now, I would say that, success sometimes is not seen, it is felt. When I look at politics, I'm a political novice, or I was a political novice when I came in. And I had a discussion with the Carter Center, and one of the greatest compliments that I actually got through that process, I said, look, I am a political novice, I'm new to this field, and sometimes I have to feel my way around. And they corrected me and said, Mr. Shuman, first, I think that you're dead wrong. There is no place in this world where someone would have started a political party, contested elections, won a seat, and became the deputy speaker. There is nothing like that recorded in political history in this world. So I think you should count that as a massive success. And when I look at how we would have worked within the political landscape in Guyana, yes, I got in there and I'm the only person with 2 targets on me, one from the front, one from the back. Of course.
What do you mean by that?
Well, because as a political party, right, I'm not from the government, nor am I from the major opposition.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have 2 sides that would disagree profoundly with some of the things that I may say.
So you're sandwiched.
Yeah, I'm sandwiched in the middle, right? But then on one side, on the opposition side, I'm seated there with people who attempted to steal the country. And I think that left a really, really massive scar on the psyche of people in Guyana. And it left a massive scar in, I'd say, in Parliament in itself. So that when you stand and you take a position on an issue, you have to be very cautious on how you navigate that. In terms of the successes, I think that the successes are very measured. You may not be able to see something tangible in your hand, or look out there and say this. But we have managed to make some intervention in legislation that I think people are going to benefit in the long term from.
Mr. Shuman, I think based on the information that we have, about 10% of the Guyanese, the population in Guyana is or could be considered indigenous people. What do you believe, or could you hazard a guess as to what the indigenous people thought of the elections 2020? And have they given you a mandate? Do you have a mandate of the indigenous people?
Well, I wouldn't say that I have a mandate from the indigenous peoples. As you know, I got about 2,657 votes, the largest of any of the other parties outside of the 2 major ones. I think it really spoke to some of the underlying issues in indigenous communities. And I think to a great extent, I would have seen the government exercise a great willingness to address those issues, land titling, education, health, and there are some other deliverables, economic integration and development, infrastructural support. I would have seen the government make some very positive moves along those lines. In terms of how we galvanize votes,
No, I wasn't asking that. I really wanted to get, does the Amerindian people have an opinion what transpired in 2020 and was likely, what are some of the conclusions
I
that they made?
think there are some, the indigenous votes have always traditionally been split very closely. And I think what transpired in 2020 would have soured a lot of people from the APNU camp. They wanted to ensure that their votes were respected, that they were equal beneficiaries to our patrimony, whether it is forest products, gold, oil, or whatever. And I think when APNU attempted to steal the country,
APNU AFC.
APNU AFC, thank you. But I use APNU as a blanket because AFC was, they were muted through their entire process. Or maybe they lost their spine through their entire process. But what they attempted to do, I think, would have distanced a lot of indigenous peoples from that political party. So the new political reality is, if you were to go to the polls, and I just venture a guess here, that you wouldn't see the kind of support for the APNO camp.
Interesting. Very.
Lenox, why, these are things people need to know so it could be recorded. Why didn't the 9 opposition parties sometime in November or December, why didn't they merge to contest the election in March 2020? Why did they split? One thought it would have been a consensus among them to be the third force, seeing that AFC had become dead meat.
Freddie, I think one of the big things that happened is that too many egos were at play. If you look at all of the political parties, no one really understood, and I would have always said this, right? Traditionally, and when we sat down, we had a nice big meeting at New Thriving Restaurant. There were about 20 of us there, all the parties represented. And I told the gathering at that lunch that we had, I said, look, the political reality is, when you go to the polls, you're going to have the Afros vote for the PNC and the Indos vote for the PPP. And the only group that does not have that kind of leadership would be the indigenous peoples. So why don't we merge all? Look, at the end of the day, we're trying to make a change, create a change. And if you've got a block there, like the Robert Badals and the whoever else, and then on the other side, you've got the TCIs with their leadership structure. So basically, you're fighting the APNO AFC for their votes and PPP for their traditional base. And you still have the center that does not have the kind of representation. So I think too many people just sat there and looked at one indigenous guy and say, man, who is this indigenous man to come and tell me that I should follow him? It's the best way forward. I think that there was a great degree of ignorance in how the electorate would have voted. And I think too many egos were played that they really could not see beyond their noses as to what stood to be gained nationally.
So we are 2.5 years going on to 3 years of the success of Lenox Shuman and the Liberty and Justice Party. Where do both of you go from here?
Well, I still have a portfolio with the government to help them with their aviation portfolio, if I were to put it that way. Sorry to use it twice. But I still have an obligation to help Guyana. When I came here, I didn't come here for my personal benefit. I came here to help Guyana grow. And where I see deficiencies, I offer my views, and aviation is one of those places where I still offer my views to help to grow that space. I think Guyana needs all hands on deck. I think the time for all of the squabbling about this and squabbling about that, we really don't have the space, we don't have the human capacity to address our fundamental needs. So for me, it is trying to figure out now how or what new role I can play in helping Guyana. And I think one of the things that I had said before when we were campaigning, I said, you know, at the end of the day, we could deal with opposition politics all we want. But at some point, we have to look at how do we deal with, yes, you could oppose in certain areas, but how do we deal with cooperative politics? I think David Hines, my apologies, was on this show, and, you know, when the government just got elected, he was saying, you know, create chaos and shut the government down and all these things. In my humble view, that is very destructive to a nation. I think that if I truly care about Guyana, what I should be telling people is, look, find a way to help to build your community. Find a way to help to build the things that are important to the people around you, instead of finding a way to disrupt progress and to break things down. Every time we use two hands to break, it's time that we're not using two hands to build. And I'm a firm believer in cooperation, cooperative building.
I want to ask you, come to Parliament, what has been some of your experience? And I also want you to address the question as to the strength of the opposition. We all know the role of the opposition. The first question there, are you worried, or should Guyana be worried? We know that government has their mandate and they have a plan to think, but should we be worried that the opposition is not effective because of its credibility? And two, your experiences in Parliament there, what are some of the hurdles that or challenges that you would have experienced?
Well, I think that for for the largest part, the opposition is listless. It's a listless ship, or rudderless ship. There's no leadership or no sense of leadership in the major part of the opposition. There are times when the leader of the opposition doesn't even show up at Parliament at all. Yet you're debating some very critical and important bills. As you know, they tried to hijack the mace, amongst a variety of things. Um, I think that the people who exercise the kind of confidence in APNU AFC would have misplaced their trust and their confidence that those people would represent them at Parliament or in Parliament. Should the country be afraid that we don't have an opposition or anything of the sort? I think that the government during this time has been given the latitude to aggressively address the infrastructural deficiencies that we have suffered from for decades. And I think maybe a little bit of untethering that is happening with such a weak opposition is necessary. Um, you know, to go into Parliament and say, look, I've got a budget that I want to pass because this is the way I want to see the country grow. These are the critical infrastructural points. This is how we want to address the economy. I think it gives the government that latitude. Where the opposition now becomes critical is when they get to the Public Accounts Committee.
Exactly.
And the point, I think, if they don't have the kind of credibility going in there, and you ask about what happened in 2020, I think 2020 they would have taken all of the political capital that they would have gained from 2015 and they would have built up before that, all into 2020, and what they did from the no confidence motion to all of the court battles to trying to hijack the country and all that stuff, it would have taken away all of that goodwill from them and tossed it out. So I think that the opposition now, it needs a complete rebranding, and I don't know that there's a recovery point for APNU or PNC. AFC, on the other hand, and this is just my layman's analysis of politics in Guyana, I think, and for AFC, having thrown their lot in with APNU in that point, they had an opportunity to completely step off that boat when the whole attempted theft was happening. They had an opportunity to come right out and say, you know what, we are not going to be part of this. We fought against this when we started the Alliance for Change, and at least hold on to whatever little they had. But we know that they didn't do that. So right off the bat, I think that APNU AFC are gone, and the time to rebuild for a solid center in that sense, we're looking at 15 to 20 years.
And yeah, I was about to ask you the timeline on that.
Uh,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was coming to that. The trauma, the lacerations, the mental lacerations of 2020 are still going to be with people in another 18 months. We have elections. You have to say the campaign begins in 2024. So we're looking down the road. Do you see a resuscitated opposition? Do you see a vibrant, dynamic opposition, given what is going on with the PNC now?
I think what we will see is a leadership change again in the PNC. I don't see Aubrey Norton becoming the presidential candidate. Right now, he's holding on by a nail, a single nail.
Skin of his teeth, you call it.
If you want to put it that way, sure. But I think too many people want to become a leader of the opposition, and I don't think any of them really understand fellowship. In order to be a good leader, you have to also learn how to follow. Everyone wants to jump straight from zero to hero, and I think that there will be a leadership change. If there is not a leadership change, I could see that they're going to suffer a very significant defeat. Well, they will suffer it anyway. Mm-hmm. It's just how significant. And I think even if they change leadership, I don't see anyone even within the middle tier of leadership within the PNC that could step up. Why? Because most of them tainted themselves through that process also. Mm-hmm. You had some good up and coming leaders, except that when it came to they decided to take a hard, solid party line, jump in line, and say, you know what, this is it. I'm going to go out there and peddle the lies that we won the elections. Where they also had an opportunity to sit quietly, maybe not support, maybe not be forward, or maybe not jump off completely, but just sit down and observe. And then you come out and say, look, we could rebrand this party, we could find a new direction, but you don't have any kind of, you don't have top tier leadership in the PNC or APNU AFC. You don't have middle tier leadership in APNU AFC. So basically now they have to go through an entire rebuilding process.
Right.
And that in itself is going to take time.
But do you know there was a comical dimension in the attempted rigging that involved the Liberty and Justice Party. When Mingo read the fake statements of polls, some of the votes were taken from the Liberty and Justice Party. So these people didn't just enter the locker of the PPP and stole some ballots. They were the official statements of polls and Mingo's tally showed that the Liberty and Justice Party had some votes stolen from them. That was quite an hilarious part. And I remember you saying they took your votes.
Absolutely. When
I think I remember that.
when we looked at the statements of polls that we had, and Bingo was putting up his spreadsheets.
You can see from a small party.
Exactly. We're no big giant. You know, you guys have your big battle. You're going to take the 1 and 2 from us to cushion your how many ever thousand you're claiming that you won by. It was completely and utterly unfair. Well, unfair across the board. But not only are you trying to destroy the PVP, you're trying to destroy everyone else in the process.
Along the lines of consultation and governance, Mr. Shuman, how would you describe the Irfan Ali government when it comes to engaging with small parties? I'm listening to you. Are you able to have a voice, although you have a position and then you're the deputy speaker, and I think you're going off now? But do you have a voice? Is he somebody who listens? And could you at the same time say whether you believe he has 2 terms easy?
Well, I strongly believe that he has 2 terms, and if he was given another 3rd or 4th, I think that they have the kind of gravitas to pull the votes to continue along that path. Whether or not he listens, I think that he has a great sense of concern for the people. How does he now amalgamate that into act?
I'm asking you directly.
Action, yeah?
I'm asking you directly whether you have found cases where you have concerns with regards to your constituency, your people that you represent, and that
absolutely. And those, how do I get to that point? Remember, I spoke about, tangible versus policy changes. I think the government is responsive. When we have the conversations about a change in a policy that would affect Indigenous peoples, and not only Indigenous peoples, but generally people, they have been very receptive. So I think that shows, it reflects very, very clearly how responsive the president is, because as the chief executive, he could simply say, look, we don't want this. Let's write it off. But I think they see some of the wisdom in that, and I have to give them credit for that. They have been very responsive. Are there points where I think they can do better? Absolutely. You pick it. Guyana is a country filled with opportunities, and pick any one of the opportunities to be developed, it's still there. Right? It's going there, but I think we also have in Guyana a capacity issue for delivery. The government has a very aggressive infrastructural development plan, but when you've got only a handful of people with the kind of capacity to do it, and those people are being pulled, they're pulling all of the employees, the government is being vacuumed out by the oil companies and support. Now what you're going to find is a deficiency in the institutions. So I think that the government has been very measured in how they approach the development of the country. I think it is very cautious. Yes, it's bold, it's very forward, but it's also very cautious. I use this as one. People talk about, let's raise minimum wage. Now, if you raise minimum wage, what you do is in the public sector, you completely decimate the private sector. And if you raise minimum wage in the private sector, you completely decimate the public sector.
That's measured.
So it has to be measured, and the government has to be very cautious about how they teeter that. all the way up, right? And that's why you wouldn't see an aggressive, you know what, we've got the capacity from right now to raise our minimum wage to $200,000. If we did that, look at what it will do to the private sector. So it is how do they balance that to ensure that everything goes along without hamstringing the economy? I think the government has
Well, that's
more
an
responsibility.
interesting point.
You certainly made a name for yourself in those 5 months. I remember one time when, in the 5 months of the election rigging, no one could enter the room where Claudette Singh was. And I think you were one of the persons that kept feeding the world the possibility of harm. And as Leonard Gildarie said, you became one of the guardians of democracy during the 5 months. That must have been you yourself said, you entered politics, you were a political novice. Seeing what was happening there, that was confusion, that was pandemonium. This was the person in charge of the body that will pronounce on the elections or steer the election ship. And she was locked up in a room, and you were broadcasting with your smartphone to the world. It must, for a newcomer in politics, it must have been daunting.
Freddie, I will tell you, I was petrified, I was scared. And I think the country really never understands or never appreciates how critical and how important that moment was. My big fear was if any harm would have came to Justice Claudette Singh, as the chairman of GCOM, there could be no declaration, because it is only the chairman that can declare. That would take you back to having the leader of the opposition and the president meet and deciding again. By then, they're going to do whatever they want and whatever they can to alter everything, change the entire game, and we'd be caught in this position where we're trapped in a dictatorship. And people, I don't think a lot of people
Was that
understand that.
I never really heard that discussed, but was that a very real fear?
Absolutely. She was sequestered. We had no access to her. And my fear, like I said, if you look down the constitutional path, if there is no chair of GCOM, then the country is in this stasis. You can't do anything.
Did Claudette Singh ever, as chairperson, discuss what transpired?
She testified that she was overwhelmed and she sought refuge in that room. We have to be careful. I want to skip that. I think she has persevered. She's facing tremendous pressure and she's still persevering. But I believe, and I'm going to ask Lenox Shuman, who was in the thick of things in those 5 months, I believe there was, and it hasn't been brought to the surface because I think all players want to forget about it and they don't want it to be discussed. They just want to move on. And I could understand, especially the other opposition parties apart from AP and UFC and the government. But there was some talk that there was a desperate attempt to harm her.
Well, I really don't know, but once again, that was my fear. That when she was absent from the room and no one could get to her, this fear overcame me that if anything were to happen to the chair of the Guyanese Elections Commission, that the country would be lost. We really would be lost. And I would go back to this. I don't think people understand or appreciate, except for the people that were there, appreciate how close we came to being stuck in what I would call somewhat of a North Korea scenario, where you're under this heavy-handed dictatorship.
When this was going on, your family was in Canada, your wife was in Canada, you were broadcasting live. But just did they ever? What was the transmission between you and your family? Look, get out of there, watch yourself. Do you think harm will come to you?
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that I never really paid attention to too much, and my wife kind of brought it to my attention, she said, when you were broadcasting, when you're doing one of your live, you were talking about there's a bomb threat at the Ashman's building at Region 4 Tabulation Center. And you now think of someone with a North American kind of mindset, right? That if someone calls a bomb scare at a building, immediately everything is vacuumed, they clear it for blocks, they cordon off the area, they've got bomb squad, they've got robots, they've got everything that they can to try to locate that device to ensure no harm comes to the people. It makes national news, it makes international news, all of that stuff. Now you transpose that kind of mentality to what was happening in Guyana. And my wife, when I spoke to her, she said, look, Lenox, I don't want to go back to Guyana right now. There is a lot of healing that needs to be done, because when you were talking about a bomb threat at Ashman's building, I honestly thought that you were going to be killed, that a bomb will explode and will completely blow you up and blow up everyone there. And I don't want to live in an environment of fear. My sisters were crying, my mom was crying, thinking that I'm on a pathway to sure demise. So that is what happened through that process.
You thinking, because you were there. I mean, you
Absolutely.
were one of the faces of those 5 months thing. One of the faces. You're thinking of writing anything of your account of what happened there?
It's been a thought, but I haven't really had a lot of time to sit down and put things together. And I'm not much of a. I could write short stories maybe, but I think, Freddie, I'd have to rely on your good guidance to maybe put something together.
I will certainly help you. One of the things I want to ask you about that, we have had this program for 8 months, and many of our guests, we have asked them about that Ashman thing, how it eventually ended. We asked Jerry Gavaya that, and he gave a very interesting response, which I'd like to put to you. He said he thinks that David Granger in the end, did the right thing and said, I will accept GCOM declaration. You share that view of Jerry Gavaya, that in the end, Granger made his decision. I am not going to reject GCOM's final results.
I think that he had no choice. I think David Granger had an opportunity to come right out of the gates and say, look, as leader of this political party or these political parties, I want to see the SOPs and I want to ensure that everything is done right.
Was that off his own will or because of pressure?
And this is what I'm saying. I don't think that he had much of a choice in the matter. Had he not done that, I think he would have been sanctioned. He may not have been able to get a visa to go anywhere. And I think with the support of the ABC, EU, and the international community, I think they would have sat down and say, look, if this is not going to happen, if you're not going to respect the democratic norms, then there are some obvious consequences that come with that. So I don't think that he had too much choice in the matter.
But are you aware of the theory that there were some inflexible hawks breathing down? There was one woman that was actually cussing him down, a very, very top PNC person, and in the end, he just got mad, and I don't want to say anything more because it's going to point to who, but I don't think he and that person would ever be on speaking terms, because she abused him.
Well, I'm not sure, and I have not heard that story, but I think had he not made that declaration, it would have been a very uncomfortable position for all of them, and that's my humble view.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Mr. Shuman, on another note, when we look in our country right now is developing pretty rapidly. You see developments all over the place, infrastructure and otherwise. And of course, there's another side when it comes to your founder of a party. Have you been looking at the changing demographics and how that is going to be impacting on future elections? What are some of your thoughts, and how do you see the PPP, and let's talk about the PNCR, how are they going to fare in future elections? And we could talk about, I'm speaking specifically with immigrants and so on that we have here.
Look, there are some fundamental fears that we had. Why 2020 was so critically important, and I would go back to 2018 2017 as a datum. In 2017, I remember making a remark that if the political party in power cannot address the indigenous people's issues, they will feel the consequences in 2020, and so spoken, so done. And one of the largest issues for us at the time is that there was zero movement on land titling. And I say zero, absolutely zero, because I sat on the Amerindian Land Titling Board, and there are times when the then commissioner and CEO of Guyana Lands and Service Commission said, very forward with Sidney Alicock, Valerie Gredelo, UN, all of the board members there, I am not giving out any more land titles. So he said that on many, many occasions. And a large fear for us was, even though that Norway was giving in all this money to execute land titling, that when we get to that point and we start getting oil revenues, we no longer depend on Norway funds, then the government has zero motivation to title any indigenous community. And that was a massive fear for us. So when we look at 2020, was there a fear about the change in demographics? Not in the 2020 datum. And I think even going down the road, indigenous peoples will always have a critical role to play in politics in Guyana. We will always have a presence. I think it may be slightly diminished as we start to go down and look at a revised immigration policy. As you know, if the population grows and the indigenous people's population does not grow, it decreases that number, obviously, representative. So I don't think that there is too much of a fear there. I think if the government continues on its agenda, I think that we will be well represented. And I think we are going to see some kind of equitable distribution of the nation's wealth.
No, I wasn't talking about that. There's a whole influx with the Venezuelans and other things. It is a reality that we have to deal with. And I wanted to know if there's any contemplation as to what kind of impact that would make on any future elections.
I strongly believe that the people with the immigration policies, I think, first, let me say very forward that I think Guyana needs a revised immigration policy. In fact, we need an immigration policy, not just I could get married to someone today and be a citizen tomorrow. There's nowhere else in the world where you can do that. Yes, you've got places where you've got immigration by investment. But I think in Guyana, where we are headed, we need to set some more stringent targets for how we see people as Guyanese. It shouldn't be just that I get married because, as you know, with local content law and stuff, there are marriages of convenience. So we need to close that door as soon as we can. Change in demographics, will it shift how people vote? I think we would still have to look 15, 20 years down the road to see that effect. And I think going forward, with all of the work that the government is doing, we are going to have a lot more of a knowledge-based economy. People are going to be making more informed decisions, and it may not fall back to the old political loyalties.
Well, I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure if you put it correctly, and I think the authorities will probably want to correct you. I don't think you could marry someone, a Guyanese could marry someone and they become a citizen tomorrow. No, we have our laws and we have our processes.
There's a time. There's a time period.
That may be just a slight amplification, but let's look at the future of Guyana. Do you see the whole world, the exports, the academics, the international business magazines are focusing on this country? Do you see this now? For 70, 80 years, we have been in the doldrums. Do you see now is the takeoff?
Yeah. Well, Freddie, thank you for that correction, and I'll take that. I'll walk that remark back. It is an over-amplification, and I appreciate that. Do I see Guyana where? Sorry.
Do you see now we will have a future?
Absolutely.
Now this will be a society where you go into a police station and they have sufficient cars. You go into a school and you see the children with their computers because the internet is the way to go, and they have good washrooms. And
Absolutely, I think we're on that path to transformation. it will not be an easy road. We are going to have a lot of hiccups. We are going to have a lot of stumbles because Guyana had suffered from a brain drain for decades. And I think where we are right now, as I said earlier, we need all hands on deck. Yes, somewhere down the road, I've seen some massive shifts in the police force, though we find it hard to see the effects on the streets. I know that the top brass of the police force are working tirelessly to transform the psychology of the members. It is now going to be a slow process, a quick process. Sorry. I see somewhere down the road, especially understanding and having discussions with the various ministers in where they want to see their sectors, that we are going to be able to see once again a knowledge-based economy, where it's a slow process to a meritocracy, and that's the direction we're headed.
What are you here for the long haul? We're going to see you here another 5, 10, 15 years.
Freddie, I renounced my Canadian citizenship, so I have nowhere to go. I'm Guyanese and I was born in Guyana. I live in Guyana, so I don't know where I can go without a visa. I mean, I could take a visitor's visa and go and visit people, but
You don't get a problem getting a Canadian visitor's visa.
no, I have a Canadian visitor's visa, but I can't go and live anywhere without going through an application process. Now, what the future holds, right now, I've made a commitment to Guyana, and I've made a commitment to supporting development in Guyana, and I intend on seeing how much I can do before my time comes to an end, whether it is my physical time or my literal time.
The U.S. ambassador says something. I know you're a pilot, right?
Yes.
And you're an aviation consultant. The U.S. ambassador said something. She said it's cheaper for a ticket to Miami than into the interior. I mean, it's. I would like to see Kaiju Falls, but it's not a little 10,000, 15,000. It's a lot of money to travel to see your country in the interior.
Yes, Freddie, it is. And the reasons, every time you think that you've got the solution, a company will come out and find another way to still maintain their profit margins. When you say, all right, well, look, we don't have an issue with parts, they're going to say fuel is expensive. Fuel comes down, it's always a juggle. And I think to a great extent, some of them just want to maintain their profit margin. I think that's it. I really have no explanation for it. I know, in my humble view, it can be done cheaper. I have seen it done cheaper globally, or let's say more cost effective globally. Companies have grown to some massive successes globally with a different structure. But whoever is operating in Guyana, I don't want to venture into their business, but I strongly believe that there are more effective ways to deliver aviation services to indigenous peoples and those communities.
Lennox, when you were pretty young, we had a very thriving.
I'm still young.
Oh, no, when you were a little boy, we had a thriving state-owned airline, Guyana Airways. You think there's room for that again?
No. I don't think that we have the capacity to have a national carrier, and if the government, if there's one thing that I would implore the government continuously, is to not have a national carrier. I think when you get a national carrier, it creates a different dimension. I strongly believe that the government should be a facilitator of business, not in business. If you look at state-owned carriers globally, they end up losing money. Many of them have to be subsidized. Nepotism becomes rampant, and you've got square pegs and round holes, right? I'm a manager of a grocery store. I'm going to go and manage an airline. It doesn't match, different dynamics altogether. Aviation is the safest industry in the world, and it got to that point because of, I'd say, a global collaboration. It got to that point because of strong legislation and because of how we address experts in the field. You would never find a safer industry globally. And I don't think that we have the capacity right now in Guyana to address a national airline. What we do have the room for is for private investors who want to invest in the space to build an airline and brand it nationally if you want with the government's endorsement, get the government support to get it done. But I see that Guyana really is desperately in need of its own indigenous carrier.
The operators have signaled to us that our time has come. So I can't give my final words, neither Gildarie. We'll leave you to give the final words.
Well, I want to say thank you both again. Thanks to the viewers. And I think that everyone in Guyana has a right to be excited about the future growth of Guyana and where we are. I think that the government has done a lot of things right, and they are going to continue along that path. I've seen a lot of positive steps. There will be missteps, obviously, but we cannot permit some of the missteps to divert our attention from what the country will be.
Well, we have to wish you well with your Achilles heel, and we hope you're doing well. You're doing well, right?
Yeah,
You're working well and everything.
So
Let's wish him well in when did they say you'll come out of the plaster of Paris?
I'll be out of the plaster of Paris in 6 weeks, but it'll be about 6 months before I can be fully mobile again.
6 months?
Yeah.
That's daunting. On that daunting dimension, we will end. But we wish you well, and you're a resilient guy. That 6 months will cut down to 3 months. You've been looking at the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon Show, and our guest was the resilient Lenox Shuman, founder and leader of the Liberty and Justice Party. Mr. Shuman is about to demit office as Deputy Speaker and Parliamentarian. That's because it is shared among 3 parties, ANUG and the New Movement. They will succeed Lenox. Lenox, we have to have you back here again. It was a pleasure.
Freddie. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leonard.